Welcome to the debate. Imagine spending, a decade building a pristine, multi-million-dollar track record.
Right.
And then you're told that actually proving it could get you disqualified.
Yeah, it sounds crazy. Usually, when we evaluate a professional's career history, we expect absolute transparency, like looking at the blueprints of a house.
Exactly. You want to see every load-bearing wall, every wire, every pipe. It is comforting because it is completely visible and, entirely verifiable.
But then, you step into the world of the LPR Academy Module 10 capstone, and suddenly you are explicitly told to hide those blueprints.
Hide them completely.
Yeah, this is the final gate for candidates seeking the Certified Living Professional Record Advisor credential, the CLPRA. Modules 1 through 9 teach the method, but Module 10 tests the application of that method. You have to build, govern, and defend a miniature living professional record.
And at the heart of this evaluation is a doctrine that creates just this massive structural tension, which forms our central question today.
The doctrine of, quote, proof is not permission.
It is a massive tension. I'll be arguing that the heavy reliance on safe summaries inherently weakens the fundamental requirement of source-to-surface traceability.
And I'll be taking the stance that strict privacy governance is actually the ultimate demonstration of true advisor judgment. So let's look at the rules.
Right, because the mandate is incredibly strict. The exact wording is, privacy failure can block certification.
It's an automatic red flag.
Exactly. Do not submit unsafe confidential material. Do not expose third-party information. Do not include employer-owned files unless clearly safe and permitted. And, crucially, do not upload protected material into AI.
Which is a huge hurdle for a lot of candidates.
It is. You have to use safe summaries, metadata-only entries, privacy labels, and the Privacy and Exclusion Log. The capstone must protect the subject at all costs. But if every claim must answer to evidence, how can an assessor verify anything if the proof is scrubbed of all meaning?
Well, see, I think you're looking at the scrubbing as a subtraction of value rather than the core competency being tested.
How so?
Because, anyone can just blindly copy and paste raw financial data into an initial evidence inventory. The true test of an advisor is maintaining that boundary between what is true and what is safe to share in public.
You can't ignore the explicit doctrine of the method itself.
Which is?
Quote, every claim must answer to evidence and every rendering must trace back to the record. The entire methodology is built on verifiable truth, but your strict privacy mandate creates this evidentiary void.
I don't think it's a void.
Well, imagine an advisor is working with a candidate who claims they saved a failing division by increasing margins 30% in 6 months. If the advisor uses a safe summary to protect that employer's financials, the assessor reviewing it cannot objectively verify if those measure clues are accurate.
Sure, they can't see the raw data.
Right. They have no idea if the 30% is real or entirely fabricated. We are asking candidates to prove their competence in extracting evidence, but the privacy rules strip the proof of its verifiable substance.
I mean, you're assuming source-to-surface traceability requires exposing the actual file to the assessor. It doesn't.
Of course it does. How else do you verify it?
Think of a massive financial audit. An auditor doesn't need to read every single internal corporate email or sit on every executive board meeting to verify a transaction.
Okay, but
They verify the ledger. In the miniature professional record, the metadata is the ledger. Source-to-surface traceability doesn't require exposing the contents of a sensitive file.
then what does it require?
It requires tracking the status and the boundary of the claim through the exclusion log and straight into the final rendering.
Yeah, but that ledger analogy completely breaks down here.
Why?
Because in a financial audit, if the auditor suspects fraud, they can subpoena the underlying documents. They have the authority to drill down to the bedrock truth. In the Module 10 capstone, there is no subpoena.
Well, no, it's a certification test.
Exactly. Let's look at the automated benchmark, the software engine designed to scan the structural integrity before a human ever sees it. Its job is to identify major discrepancies, right? Like overstated claims.
Right.
How exactly does an automated engine accurately detect an overstated claim if the underlying evidence has been reduced to a metadata-only entry?
Because the engine isn't checking the objective historical truth of the candidate's past.
Then what is it checking? if it can't see the data, it's like a doctor trying to diagnose a patient by looking at a shadow on the wall.
I wouldn't go that far.
If I write a safe summary that says, managed a highly sensitive multi-million-dollar revenue project, the automated benchmark just has to take my word for it. It cannot flag an invented metric if the metric is hidden behind a privacy shield.
The benchmark evaluates the internal logic and the structural mapping of the constraints. It checks if the candidate correctly identified proof gaps based on the restrictions they logged.
So it's just checking compliance to their own self-imposed rules?
Yes, exactly. If a candidate says in the inventory that the evidence is restricted, but then during the final draft phase they somehow produce a highly specific, metrics-heavy public resume bullet full of those exact restricted financials, the structural logic breaks.
Ah, I see.
That is what the automated benchmark catches. It flags that the advisor either lied about the restriction initially or recklessly violated their own privacy boundary in the final draft.
Right, but you are still relying on the candidate's own self-reported safe summaries to judge their logic. That perfectly mapped internal logic might align with a total fabrication. And, well, this friction goes from a theoretical problem to a massive practical failure when we look at the mandatory artificial intelligence requirement.
Ah, you mean the removal of the old no AI used attestation?
Yes. Because AI use is now mandatory in the capstone, candidates must submit a verified, safe source packet alongside a source-bound prompt. But remember the absolute rule, do not upload protected material into AI.
Which makes total sense for data security.
Sure, but consider a high-level executive, the exact type of complex client a certified advisor will actually work with. The absolute strongest evidence of their value is almost always strictly confidential.
Strategic roadmaps, proprietary code-based structures.
Unreleased post-merger financial models. Yes, things that absolutely cannot be fed into a commercial large language model.
Right.
So, because they cannot feed this critical context of the AI, they are forced to run the AI on weak, heavily sanitized evidence. You are forcing them to generate AI output from a compromised source.
It's not compromised, it's governed.
If you starve a language model of specific contextual data, it will inevitably generate generic, high-level corporate fluff. You are intentionally breaking the tool the candidate needs to use.
See, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the architecture of the test. Yes, we starve the AI of context. Yes, the AI will generate output based on a sanitized source packet.
And that's a good thing?
That restriction isn't a flaw in the capstone design. The restriction is the entire point of the exercise.
Wait, forcing a candidate to produce weak AI output is the point of a master-level capstone?
The capstone tests AI governance, not AI optimization. The Academy is not testing whether you can be a clever prompt engineer and make an AI sound impressive. It is testing whether you can act as a firewall.
A firewall?
Yes, it's testing whether you can assert human authority over the machine. Think about what actually happens when you starve an AI of context. What does it do?
Well, it hallucinates. It makes things up to fill the void.
Precisely. It overstates claims, it fills in the blanks with aggressive corporate jargon that sounds great but is completely unmoored from the underlying evidence. Let's walk through a concrete example.
Okay.
A candidate feeds the AI a safe summary about a corporate merger. Because they stripped out the proprietary financial mechanics of the deal, the AI decides to spice up the output by claiming the executive drove a 50% increase in post-merger synergy revenue, a complete hallucination.
Which the automated system can't catch because it can't see the original restricted data.
But the candidate must catch it. The candidate proves their competence by identifying that exact hallucinated metric. They must submit the required AI output claim check and fill out the rejected AI claims log.
Right.
They have to formally document. The AI claimed a 50% increase. This was rejected because it exceeds the boundary of the safe source packet.
So you intentionally set the AI up to fail, just so the candidate can play whack-a-mole with its hallucinations.
We intentionally set the AI up to operate within the real-world constraints of corporate data privacy. The candidate has to review that output, reject the unsupported claims, and produce a human-approved output. It brilliantly forces the candidate to demonstrate that artificial intelligence must always answer to the historical record.
Governing the AI to prevent hallucination is a rigorous test of discipline, I will grant you that. But let's follow that exact mechanism all the way through to the final evaluation, the certification defense.
The final hurdle.
Yeah, because while catching those AI hallucinations proves you can govern a prompt, the human assessor still has to evaluate the final assembled record. And in the capstone defense scenario bank, there is a specific scenario candidates are warned they must be prepared to defend.
Which one?
The strongest evidence is confidential. How do you render safely?
Yes, the classic tension point.
It is not just a tension point. It is an impossible structural bind. Let's say a candidate follows your advice perfectly. They respect the doctrine that proof is not permission. They restrict heavily. They use metadata-only entries.
As they should.
And they ruthlessly reject all the hallucinated AI outputs. What are they left with? They end up with incredibly sparse, heavily abstracted final renderings. When the automated system reviews that, they get flagged with a remediation required notice for producing generic renderings.
Well, that can happen if they over-abstract, yes.
But look at the alternative. If the candidate tries to inject just enough detail to make the rendering actually impactful and verifiable, they immediately trip the wire for an unsafe evidence exposure.
If they cross the line.
If they restrict to stay safe, they fail for being generic. If they add detail to be verifiable, they fail for privacy exposure. The evaluation just becomes a guessing game based on the subjective preferences of whichever human assessor pulls their file.
I completely reject the idea that it's an impossible structural bind. You are describing the exact dictionary definition of advisor judgment.
But judgment implies a solvable problem. If the parameters contradict each other, there is no correct answer for the assessor to objectively grade.
It is solvable. We have to remember the core doctrine here. Certification is not worksheet completion. A standard resume writer just asks a client, "What sounds good?" An LPR advisor has to constantly triangulate 3 distinct questions.
Truth, verifiability, and safety.
Exactly. What is true, what is verifiable, and what is safe? The tension between mapping proof gaps and identifying claims that must be avoided is exactly what separates a certified CLPRO from a standard career coach. Plus, it relies heavily on the candidate's self-remediation loop.
But the self-remediation loop is driven by the automated checks, which, as we established, are evaluating the logic of obscure data.
The automated checks operate as for-your awareness notifications. If a candidate restricts too much and produces a hollowed-out rendering, the system returns it with specific remediation instructions. They don't fail permanently.
Which just means returning to the exact same bind. How do you recalibrate a hollow rendering without exposing the raw data that got you flagged in the first place?
By understanding how to abstract a value pattern without exposing the underlying intellectual property. That is the exact skill being tested.
Abstracting a value pattern.
Yes. Let's go back to your example of the operational turnaround. You don't need to expose proprietary profit and loss statements. A skilled advisor will identify the behavioral pattern the executive used to achieve that margin increase.
Like a unique vendor restructuring methodology.
Exactly. You document the existence of the strategy, the timeline, and the public outcome, while placing the specific financial mechanics strictly in the exclusion log. You govern the boundary.
I understand the mechanism, I do, but let's look at what actually happens in practice when an advisor sits down with a real paying client. The client wants results. If the advisor is trained by Module 10 to be terrified of the automatic red flag for exposing evidence, they will inevitably overcorrect in the real world.
You think the capstone makes them too cautious?
Terribly cautious. They will build a professional record that is perfectly compliant, perfectly governed in the exclusion log, and completely useless in the competitive job market because it's too sanitized. The market demands hard proof.
That assumes effective market translation requires exposing raw, sensitive data, which the LPR method fundamentally rejects.
But verifying the alignment of outcomes still requires trusting the advisor's interpretation of a safe summary. We circle right back to diagnosing the shadow on the wall.
I disagree.
The method claims every rendering must trace back to the record. But if the record is just a series of locked boxes, the assessor is fundamentally certifying the advisor's claim of traceability, not the traceability itself.
The assessor is certifying the mathematical impossibility of faking the process. Think about the sheer weight of the interconnected artifacts required.
Oh, come on. Mathematical impossibility?
Seriously, look at the structure. If the privacy and exclusion log perfectly maps to the safe source packet, which perfectly maps to the source-bound AI prompt, which maps to the rejected AI claims log, which finally maps to the precise boundaries of the final renderings. The structural integrity is proven.
That is a lot of artifacts.
It is. And the internal consistency of those dozen artifacts is practically impossible to fake without fundamentally understanding the method deep in your bones.
Okay, I will absolutely concede that the internal consistency check is a remarkably rigorous hurdle. The sheer number of artifacts required to pass the capstone makes it a heavy cognitive lift. It is not for the faint of heart.
Definitely not.
But I still maintain that leaving the standard for adequate proof somewhat ambiguous while making privacy failure an explicit automatic red flag skews the entire evaluation. It trains the advisor to treat the underlying evidence as a toxic asset.
Well, I think it trains them to respect the data as a highly potent asset that can cause massive collateral damage if mishandled. Let's summarize where we've landed on this.
Sure.
My position remains that the LPR Academy exists to certify advisors who can protect professional truth, not just exploit it. A complete miniature record that lacks strict privacy boundaries is not just a failed test. Functionally, it is a massive liability. Proof is never permission to do harm. The fact that the capstone explicitly forces candidates to govern that boundary is exactly why the CLPR credential carries weight.
And I maintain that while protection of the subject is obviously paramount, we have to acknowledge the structural reality here. The heavy reliance on redaction, on scrubbed safe summaries, and on intentionally starved AI prompts creates an inherent friction with the demand for source-to-surface traceability. It leaves assessors evaluating the shadows on the wall, not the objects themselves.
Well, I think one thing we clearly agree on is that the Module 10 capstone is a uniquely rigorous, exhausting gauntlet. It explicitly rejects the idea of merely filling out forms.
Absolutely. No one is passing this final gate by simply checking boxes or generating ChatGPT summaries. It demands a level of critical thinking about data ownership, privacy boundaries, and AI governance that is genuinely rare.
So for those of you listening and examining your own professional records, it is worth considering how much of your own foundational proof relies on confidential context.
Where exactly do you draw the line between absolute transparency and necessary protection?
We will leave the ultimate balance between verifiable evidence and privacy for you to decide. Just remember, when you want to show the world your professional house, you have to decide if showing the blueprints is worth the risk of someone stealing the design.
Or finding the cracks in the foundation.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us.